minutes to make a presentation to us. The time is yours to choose how you want to use it. You want to talk the whole time, you want to allow our time for the questions, that's up to you. Just a note, this is being live streamed as well through our Facebook page. Over to you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. We are Wellington Vegan Actions. My name is Alice Rose, my pronouns are she, they, and this is Melody Willis, her pronouns are she, her. So yeah, we're here on behalf of Wellington Vegan Actions. We are a grassroots animal rights kaupapa based here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara. We are a values-driven group with an abolitionist approach to animal rights, and we believe we are all kaitiaki of Papatua Nuku, and we believe in working alongside other movements fighting for the liberation of all the inhabitants of this one planet that we all share. We believe in striving to achieve ideals. However, we are also grounded in practicality and focused on achieving tangible outcomes through pragmatic steps. And that brings us to our petition. And I am going to pass to Melody.
Kia ora, Alice. Kia ora koutou, ko Melody toko ingoa. So I'm going to kick us off with a bit of our presentation. You'll have the documents that we've provided to you just last minute this morning. So no stress if you haven't had the opportunity to have a look at it. You're welcome to read along as we go through things. So if we flip over to our first slide, what we wanted to first talk about is the emissions that we currently see from the animal agriculture sector in New Zealand. So animal agriculture makes up about 50% of all of New Zealand's gross greenhouse gas emissions. I'm sure you're all familiar with that stat. It won't come as a surprise. What we're looking at on the screen is, of course, that snapshot from the Ministry for Environment, where we can see that breakdown of dairy cattle, sheep, and beef cattle making up that majority of our emissions compared to the remainder of our emissions. What we're looking at from here is, unsustainable levels of emissions from animal agriculture. So what we want to do is encourage the government or expect the government to make changes to reduce these. In doing so, flipping over to the next slide, please. We also want to acknowledge that the GDP contributions of agriculture makes up just under 7% of our gross GDP. Redundant grossness. So it's quite incompatible when we see the level of emissions versus the GDP contributions that we're getting out of the agriculture sector. Flipping over to the next slide, please. Something else that we're also seeing coming through the industry, which again, I'm sure you're all aware of, is cellular agriculture, such as precision fermentation, which is dairy milk, not derived directly from milking animals. It's a fairly new technology. It has been in development since about 2013, I think is the earliest cases of that coming out. I believe it's Iran has recently approved the first use and consumption of precision fermentation as well. So they're one of the first countries to approve that. So we're seeing quite quick development in this industry. And what we're looking at as well is a prediction that dairy and cattle industries, this is specifically a US-based report, but that the dairy industry would be obsolete by about 2030 and that all dairy would be gone by 2035. So that's by an independent think tank called Rethink X. There are references to those reports within the paperwork that you've been provided as well. Quite an interesting read, quite a shocking headline to see come up as well, especially when we consider that dairy is currently integral to New Zealand society. And we have, I think about, based on my last check, over 100,000 people employed in the agriculture industry. So if we do see an obsolescence of dairy and cattle, we're going to have a large proportion of our population, so I believe it's about 4% of our current working population, need to be redeployed, reskilled, and find a new area to work in. Moving on to the next slide, please. So what we're looking for from the government here is where we bring in the expectations that we've outlined in this document as well. So we've updated the expectations compared to the original petition. So if you've had a look at that one recently, you'll notice that there are some updates and renewals of what was in that original wording. We've aligned it more closely to the progression that we're seeing in the industry and trying to state measurable and tangible, realistic goals that can be achieved by government in the near future so that we can avoid a sudden collapse of industry in the next 10, 15 years. So in that, what we're requesting is that by budget 2024, acknowledging that we've obviously got an election coming up this year, people need time to settle in. We're not looking for any changes immediately, but we're looking for commitments. So by budget 2024, we're looking for commitments to engage in research or to provide grants to help and support industry to engage in research in cellular agriculture and in plant agriculture, whether that's plant proteins or alternative plants where land can be reallocated from animal agriculture to plant agriculture. Also asking that the government endorses the plant-based treaty. This plant-based treaty, it says it's a plant-based treaty, so I know that in itself comes across a bit iffy. If you have a look at the requests in the treaty, they are also kind of taking that pragmatic approach to transitioning away from an animal-centered industry. I'll pass over to the next slide and just note that with the current funding invested in animal agriculture, I think I had something like $300 and something million in the last year was invested in the animal sector, and specifically from MPI Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures funding. Of the $278 million that was invested through their grants, from what we could find, only about 10 million of those dollars were invested in solely plant-oriented research. Any other plant research that was funded was for the purpose of feeding livestock. So it wasn't actually.
Just note that you've got 2 minutes remaining.
Okay. Over to the next slide, please. And I will pass over to Alice.
So I'll keep this brief. And as a further expectation, we expect the transparency of animal agriculture and experimentation to be mandated. We expect a commitment to establishing an independent animal protection body outside of the Ministry of Primary Industries, MPI, who are currently responsible for administering the Animal Welfare Act, as well as any matters related to the well-being of animals. And alongside this, we would expect, as Melody mentioned, referring to that Food and Fibres Future Fund, I expect there to be funding provided to the animal agriculture and experimentation facilities to install cameras in all working animal housing areas. And this is to be monitored by that independent body outside of MPI. And our final expectation is around cultivating knowledge, understanding, and accessibility of plant-based agriculture and diet. As this isn't currently put forward. Yes, so our recommendation would be to update the current dietary guidelines as published by the Ministry of Health, i.e. the eating activity guidelines for New Zealand adults that was published in 2020, I believe. And we also get this to highlight plant-based whole foods as a primary source of nutrition and physical well-being for humans. And overall, this knowledge would contribute to a better understanding of the interconnectedness of the well-being of humans, animals, and our planet as one.
We do have a couple slides remaining, but we don't need to go through those. That's okay.
Are you happy to take questions?
Absolutely.
We have time for maybe one or two very quick ones. I know Mark's got one.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. And it's always nice to hear young people and enjoy and sharing what they believe in. It's obviously predicated on animal welfare and the effects of emissions and profile out of the animal ruminant sector predominantly. Are you cognizant of the fact that since 2006, the animal peak numbers have fallen dramatically? Do you agree, yes or no? Quite interested. And it's not a prosecution of my case, but certainly your interest that this is a short-lived gas that we're talking about, especially in the methane space. And by virtue, its net warming effects have been falling since 2006. And I am interested, as an alternative argument, because this is a free marketplace of ideas here, what the emissions footprint in the production of plant-based environment and food production looks like, because plant-based production does have an emissions footprint, and it's quite substantial. Have you reconciled those two?
So missed the first part of your question, so I'll
That's all
address
right.
the second part first and then come back to the first if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So with regards to the second part of your question in terms of emissions from plant-based agriculture, I have dug through the Stats NZ statistics around emissions that is freely available, and which the Ministry for Environment used to provide those figures around the 44% or 50% animal agriculture emissions. I was unable to find anything attributed to plant-based agriculture. It doesn't mean it's not there. I just wasn't able to
Because
identify
that's our
anything there.
counterfactual, right?
Yeah.
Because we lose a lot of carbon every time we activate soil.
Yeah, so what I suspect the case is much like with animal agriculture, we have a lot of active emissions. We also then have emissions as a result, or pollution as a result of the additional horticulture and earth grounding stuff that we do. So while plant-based agriculture definitely does have emissions, it's still not as extensive as animal agriculture.
And
It's
then,
definitely there.
you know, not to mention all of the plants that are needed to be grown to feed animals in the first place, you know, the caloric output versus what you put in animal, what you get out. Is it
The only reason I
necessarily-
brought that up is we're a pastoral-based system.
Yes.
Predominantly, there's not a lot of that. It's mostly for the sake of human consumption. But thank you so much.
Did you want to go back to the
Oh,
first
did you
question?
want to?
No, I'm very grateful.
You're right.
You've answered my.
Yeah, no, my question was just following on from Mark's around whether you looked into the water consumption required for plant-based agriculture versus animal agriculture, and the nitrate levels for, because obviously, as Mark pointed out, if you're having to rip out the crop every time, you know, disturbing the soil, etc., and you require more nitrate input into keeping the soils. Have you looked into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe it's within the additional or related reports and resources. So I've actually got some reports in there from the Our Fresh Water 2020 report. So that goes into a bit of the water consumption and water pollution aspects. There was also, I'm just trying to remember the name of it. There was another water something in here that I'll have to point out when I have a moment. But there is something there that actually gives you an output based on product. So that's specific plants, specific animal products. So wool, beef, chicken, tomatoes, cucumbers, and what the estimated water consumption is from those. And I believe the green protein report also goes into a lot of that information. So we've not done as thorough of a kind of technical analysis as we would like to for this type of presentation, just due to lack of capacity and resource, because it's just the two of us. But we have found a lot of reports that we've skimmed across and found a lot of that interesting information, which I think will help with the government reviewing and assessing options.
Just a quick question from Angela. Then Anna.
Just curious about the way forward is about giving opportunities to support transition. There's a lot of work in Taranaki going on with our regional development around food and fibre, and a lot of investment and research about what an alternative land use is for us, mainly dairy.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you're aware of it, or I guess I'm suggesting you keep an eye on it, and if there's any lessons from that we can scale, because as farmers are considering land use more broadly, there's a lot of work going on to support farmers with good solid research.
Yeah.
So I guess that's just a tip for you to follow on, and if you think that's the sort of thing that we need to be keeping an eye on to support farmers.
Yeah. A couple of things that I have seen in that space is we have had some dairy farmers convert to other types of farming. So you've probably heard of the dairy farmer who went and started growing pumpkins instead and doing dairy pumpkin milk. Might have heard about that. That was not too long ago. He seems to have been quite successful with that because he primarily exports to China. Most of the product goes there.
Pumpkin milk.
Yeah, pumpkin milk.
From New Zealand.
Oh, sorry, making the milk out of pumpkin.
Yeah.
That's what promoted me, feeding the cows.
I haven't tried it myself yet.
Pumpkin
So,
And I believe there was another family who transitioned to growing primarily hemp-based products. However, they very quickly went out of business because there wasn't that support there and that drive demand there for them to continue. So
And that's what Venture Taranaki are doing, is building the infrastructure for people to shift their land use.
something I realised, sorry, I know we're going over time, but in particular with the hemp side of things. I know I work in government and health sector as well. So I know that MedSafe was quite a large barrier for that particular organisation, where because they were doing hemp-based products which promoted therapeutic benefits, they then had to be registered with MedSafe to be able to sell their product. And so that was quite a legislative barrier. So something around that aspect could be quite useful to facilitate people transferring to hemp. I don't know, it is well over time, but there is a report around, I think it's the 6 types of plants.
Yeah.
I'll find it in my list. I can
Email it.
asterisk it for you.
Yeah.
But one of the reports that we've got is, I believe it came out of either Ag Research or Ministry for Environment, was around 6 main plants that would grow really well in New Zealand. And that did include soy and hemp as well as other grains. I think it might be the pulses and grains report.
Field innovation.
Yeah. But so there are those options.
That's cool.
Would that take into account climate change as the weather patterns that we're currently seeing?
It does take into account a lot of the environmental outputs as well. So the effects that the plant agriculture would have compared to the animal agriculture. So it is, yes. Still
I mean, in terms of the crops that are suitable for growing on plants.
Adaptation.
yes, I believe so. Yeah. I'll have to check.
All right, I'm going to take the liberty out to ask one further question, because I know that any farmer watching our Facebook page right now would go, if we move to plant-based agriculture, what happens to all the animals?
Well, I guess that's the point in asking for a transition, right? We're definitely not saying that it's going to happen overnight. I mean, as much as we said we're idealistic, we would love for animals to be roaming free, but we're pragmatic and we know it's not going to happen. So the theory that I've had in mind is, if we were to put a timeline on this, most rapid timeline would be, and not necessarily realistic, but the most rapid timeline would be maybe a 6 to 10 year transition away. Because in terms of dairying, 6 years is about the average lifespan of a dairy cow. And so if you stop breeding those cows, those generations of cows end up dying because they reach that end of profitable life stage. And then the same with beef cows. Beef, they live for about 18 months. So if you wanted to work on that same timeline, you're going to probably still be breeding them for a while. Otherwise, you would be out of beef in 2 years. And obviously, that's not a realistic thing for the industry, for the people that survive and need these jobs.
Final question to Nicola.
It's just a quick one. I suppose it's more philosophical rather than technical. And you guys seem to be calling for a gradual whole-scale conversion, right? And we as politicians, I suppose, have to make decisions about, you know, what is the greater good. So how would you expect us to communicate to the public that we're removing a freedom of choice?
So at the moment, we're not asking for that freedom of choice to be removed. That's why we are calling for a transition.
But for those people who choose to eat meat, we're talking about a whole-scale conversion away from that. How would you message that to the public?
It would be a challenging question. The idea with cellular agriculture is that those products are exactly the same as, you know, their animal-based counterparts, whether that be milk or animal flesh, and they're exactly the same on a cellular level. But you're not losing the taste, not losing the flavour. It's the exact same nutritional profile. So whilst that would be a hard sell, hopefully over time, as that, you know, would become the norm, people would, you know, become increasingly more familiar with that as an option.
In addition to that, that's why we then also have the expectations around mandating transparency in the industries, because quite often in the outreach that we have with the public, a lot of people don't realise what they're paying for when they do consume animal products. They all obviously realise that it's an animal that they're consuming, but they don't necessarily realise the steps taken to produce that burger. And it's also why we're asking to cultivate knowledge and understanding of plant-based diets and understanding the impact that animal agriculture has, not only on the environment, but on our personal health and the moral aspects as well.
So sorry, when you talk about the methods that go into creating that piece of meat, have you guys actually been on farm?
Yeah.
Have you seen how animals are grown in New Zealand?
Yeah. I grew up in New Zealand. My grandfathers, both sets of my grandparents had farms. my grandfather up in Bay of Islands did dairy, wool, pork, beef. Yeah, he had quite an operation going. So yeah, I grew up seeing a lot of that.
Are you, sorry, members continue to flag with me that they have further questions. Are you happy to stay for a moment longer to answer them?
Yeah.
And is it okay for us to? Okay.
Yes, happy
All
to.
right. So I have Joseph, Anna, and Mark.
We
No,
love
it's been
talking
nice.
about
No.
this kind of
No.
stuff. We love
All right.
engaging with people on it. It's a
Joseph,
great
Anna, and
conversation.
Todd.
Good morning. Look, thanks for coming and having this debate. And I know you represent a sector of the community who think this, and so it's important. I think we have these discussions. But look, have you looked into what impact this would have on New Zealand trade? Because you've just looked at GDP, but New Zealand has the biggest balance of trade deficit in the developed world right now.
Yeah.
So and primary sector is our biggest export. So have you factored that in? The other thing is, you say the future of milk is drawing to an eye, but China is building its herd significantly. So does that sort of indicate to you that maybe it's not just is a counterfactual there? And the other thing is, have you looked into what percentage of New Zealand is actually available to really be realistically grow vegetables? Because there's some very good reasons why we have a free range grass-fed pastoral farming system in New Zealand, which is actually quite unique globally.
Yeah. So I'll work backwards again. So in terms of the percentage of land that could be appropriated or repurposed for for plant agriculture, I do believe the pulses and grains report does go into and identify the quantity of land that would be required. And so if it's a matter of reducing the amount of livestock that we have and that we're using, that frees up a lot of the land. Obviously, not all of the land where we have livestock is arable and can be used for plant agriculture. I'm not going to try and say that it is, but a lot of the land that we do use for animal agriculture can be used and is arable. It might need a bit of conversion work to make sure that we can have thriving agriculture there again, but it is possible. I've forgotten your second question. Sorry. China, yes. Yeah, so what I've seen in the studies that I've read so far around precision fermentation specifically is that once the technology becomes more scalable to the market, it's going to be significantly cheaper than traditional or conventional dairying. The predictions are it could be anywhere from 30 to 80% cheaper than traditional dairying. So if we're looking at a supply and demand aspect of things, people are going to, by default, start deferring to a cheaper product. Some people may still prefer to go with the original, more expensive product, but the majority of society won't afford that, especially with the way cost of living is going. Does that answer that question?
Even exports.
Exports. Yes, so even though we do have a really large number of exports, we do still have to recognise that the GDP that we get from animal agriculture is very minimal. On top of that, we have to ensure that we are sustainable and not dependent on other countries, because as we're seeing, the climate is changing, the world is changing, and we can't always expect that another country is going to be able to support us, especially if we use your example of China building up their dairy industry. How is that going to affect New Zealand's dairy exports? If China is now making a very similar or equivalent product because we've exported our dairy cows to them, and now they're producing the same level of quality, that's going to affect our export.
And New Zealand has always been a world leader in so many ways, progressive and showing the way for other countries. So I had something. Why not be bold? Is the thing I would.
But I'll just say, just very supplementary on that. Do you understand the difference in the balance of payment, like how that works in terms of the country has to buy a whole lot of goods. We don't have much manufacturing capacity here, so we need to sell goods to the world in order to get that foreign exchange to buy things. Which is different from GDP.
Yes, yeah. And just using simplified means to communicate things at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, we will come to Anna, then Todd, Soraya. Last question to Mark. I'm not taking any further questions. We have other business we need to move on with.
Thank you, very fascinating, and good on you for putting your views forward. I'm interested in the wool sector.
Wool, yes.
Right. And where do you see a future for wool in New Zealand? And do you see that differently to the production of meat?
I'm really pleased you brought that up because I watched last week's presentation on the wool industry. And I saw the week before as well where our peers from NZABS, New Zealand Anti-Vivisection Society, presented too. So it was really great to hear the questions and the dialogue happening between the committee. So just putting ahead, first of all, we were very excited to come and talk with you because we knew it was going to be a great conversation. So in terms of wool, so answering your question, there are obviously differences between wool production and meat production. However, there is still, from our perspective, an ethical and a moral issue with that because we're still exploiting animals. Those animals are still ultimately being killed as commodities for our benefit. In terms of wool having a future in New Zealand, I don't think that we need to rely on wool. And obviously from last week's report, there is a decrease in demand for wool as well. From that pulses and grains survey, or it might have been one of the other reports, sorry, but they did talk about hemp being a really strong product for New Zealand. Hemp can make really great natural fibers. And I've been looking into a few of those different fibers because I know they were talking last week about the wool carpet tiles that they've recently been working on. And so I was curious about whether something's in the works for hemp, which I believe I did actually find a composite hemp and something else tile that's in progress. So there are already comparable products being designed and developed for wool. And I believe it'll be a lot cheaper as well, because again, we don't have to be growing plants to feed the animals, to then shear the animals to produce the fiber. We simply grow the plant and harvest it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So eventually, would you just not see there being any sheep and cattle farmed at all?
Farmed? Absolutely, yeah.
For what would animals be? They wouldn't be, or they would be still farmed.
They would not be farmed.
So
no.
there'd be no sheep or cattle farming in New Zealand. Pets.
Ideally in the world, pets, rescue animals. Yeah.
Our
It's obviously a very strong
yes,
idealistic
our belief and idealistic
perspective.
view is that animals, they deserve the right to live their lives for them and not for us. They are sentient beings, and our ultimate goal, we're not going to fudge over it, is to see an end to the use of animals for any reason.
Yeah. We won't be coy about it, but we're definitely not saying 10 years time you've got to stop farming sheep.
No, and we know this is not going to be, obviously it's not going to be an overnight thing, and that's why these discussions have to take place, and we recognise that there is a need for this open discussion between what is traditionally two polar opposite sides of the spectrum, because at the end of the day, nobody likes the idea of death, when we all live on this this planet together. And
what about chickens, like poultry and eggs and none of them?
No, not allowed those.
Okay.
Yeah.
And no, okay.
I would be happy to have a conversation with you about it if you like. I'm just mindful that we are taking up a lot of your business time.
We've
So-
gone
so-
well and truly beyond our 10 minutes.
more than happy to have a conversation so you can get an idea of what our perspective is. Yeah.
So we've got Todd,
Thank you.
Soraya, then Mark.
Thank you so much. And look, thanks for the way you're presenting this. I think for us to be, I think it to be challenged is a good thing. Whether we agree or not doesn't actually matter. The conversation is not a bad one to have. But I've got probably two questions. The first is, and actually it comes back to the idea of animals, or your position of animals being there to live their own lives. Does that mean somebody couldn't have a horse to ride it for fun?
As vegans, we are against horse riding, yes.
So there's a young lady down the road from me who was given a pony at her 7th birthday. She shouldn't be allowed to ride that.
I mean, if you want to, if they want to form a bond between the animal, you can, support and offer, an animal a good life without expecting something in return, whether it's that is for fun or entertainment. There are other ways to bond and care for animals without expecting an exchange there.
Yeah. All right, thank you. The other one is, and I know there's a number of points that you're making here, but the one you're talking about methane with animals and so on. There's a lot of work being done overseas, less in New Zealand, where the inputs into the animals is reducing methane quite significantly. And you can see a time when perhaps the methane that's having impact upon climate is reduced to negligible levels as a result of science. It's only one part of your argument, accept, but does that change the thinking? Because part of the rationale is the harm that animals through intensive farming could be doing to the atmosphere. If that's taken away, for many people, they would say, well, actually, just as you have a right to choose what you eat, you shouldn't be forced to eat meat. They too should have a right to choose what they eat, and they shouldn't be forced not to if that was their choice.
At that point, it definitely gets into the philosophical aspect where obviously Parliament doesn't really have the opportunity to influence people in that way. So if it came down to an aspect of methane emissions were significantly reduced, we then still have to look at the other pollutions or pollutants that we're seeing come into the atmosphere and the waterways that are being polluted, the soil that's being depleted so that we can no longer harvest or grow any other agriculture there as well. So without going into the moral side or the philosophical side at all, we're still going to consider those other technical aspects.
And if I take your case of alternatives to milk in China or anywhere else and so on, and if you're correct, and I suspect to a large degree you will be, if things are available, people enjoy them, they are more cost effective, consumers will make that choice, right? Why would we have to mandate something like that? Why wouldn't we let that naturally play its course so people have choice? And when the choice is there, they make those decisions. And businessmen, farmers, others will equally make a decision based upon that. But the great thing about New Zealand compared to almost any other country is there is no subsidy for agriculture. So if you can't make money for it, you don't get to do it, right? It's not the same in the European Union where it doesn't matter about this conversation. They're getting paid money to farm animals that will never be used, or sometimes not farm animals. So wouldn't it be the case that say, well, actually, do you have a view, which I respect, others have freedom of choice. If the consequence of their choice, whether they make it knowingly or otherwise, is for them to deal with. And as the alternatives come to market, if they're as good as you say, then naturally people will be moved in that direction rather than saying, sorry, you have to do that because we're going to take your choice away.
Yeah. So all that we're looking to mandate at the moment is transparency of the system and of the industry. Definitely not asking to mandate any transitions. My initial thinking is that because we're asking to set up principles and grants to support people to transition, is that you're going to get interest from those who are already wanting to make a transition. Obviously, dairy farmers have a lot of debt because of the industry that they operate in. And there is a lot of interest from industry to make shifts, some for their own moral or ethical reasons, some because of public backlash, some because dairying and animal agriculture is hard work. It's not easy. And I know it's not easy. I haven't done it myself, but I know that it's not easy. So I know that it's not something that people are going to want to stay in forever. So seizing this opportunity to make money available, to make research available for people to transition to either cellular agriculture, because some people might really enjoy working in that space. And with precision fermentation, my thinking is that we're still going to have New Zealand quality dairy. It's just not going to come directly from cows. And New Zealand is touted as having some of the best dairy in the world, right? So if we can champion precision fermentation before anybody else in the world, we're going to get a massive market share, which would be incredible for us.
Thank you.
Soraya, tēnā koe. Mihi ana kia kōrua, tēnā koutou. Really great to see you here as part of the next generation. Really important to hear what you've got to say. It's very interesting. And as my colleague said, it's fascinating as well. So I'm interested to know in terms of our bicultural country, whether you've had what work you've done in the space of Te Ao Māori and tangata whenua in terms of your aspirations.
Yeah, I mean, we know that, we recognise that Māori are tangata whenua of this land, and currently the way that land is used does not necessarily go in line with the values of Te Ao Māori of protecting the land and cultivating the land for future generations to come. And currently the way that the system is not compatible with those values. And of course, a lot of dairy farming takes place on stolen land, and
So personally, I work full-time, but I'm studying full-time as well. I'm studying public policy and Māori resource management. I'm very early days, but rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga was something that I was looking into quite a lot in this aspect as well. It was something I wanted to feature in my report, but unfortunately didn't have time to pull everything that I wanted together, because from a vegan philosophical aspect, I think veganism fits perfectly into the concept of kaitiakitanga, because as kaitiaki, we should be taking care of all living beings, of papatuanuku. We should be caring for the land and for the earth, and we're not doing that well enough at the moment. And in terms of rangatiratanga, we, as Alice said, we're dairying and we're doing wool farming and beef on a lot of stolen land. Most of this land hasn't been acquired appropriately or justly. So obviously that's a whole nother wider conversation. But if we do start to make these changes and offer these grants and offer funding for research, that can be prioritised for Māori, for tangata whenua. And I've seen that the MPI funding that they've provided already has a little bit going towards those kind of projects. And there are some other spaces working in Māoridom as well. It's not going far enough.
It's great that you've got a lens over it.
And you know, we have an intersectional approach to veganism and animal rights, and recognise that animal agriculture negatively affects not only animals but humans as well. You know, it's marginalised groups who often have no choice but to work in a slaughterhouse, and that's, you know, not going to help them in healing as a person. And yeah, I had something else there, but
I'm
hopefully
Just to say,
Gotta
that,
bring
if
us-
I could just make one last comment, just to say that we are natural hunters and gatherers, but
Yes.
it's part of who we are as Māori and as we survive. So obviously you'll take that into consideration too.
Absolutely, yeah.
We'll come to Mark now for our very last quick question.
quick.
Very nice, Mark.
I shall be on the operation very farm.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so what would you say to my 3 children who absolutely love living in rural New Zealand, working with animals? And to your point, Alice, on the back of the Honourable Mr. McClay, who brought up the horse riding analogy or example, used the word fun. I love farming. My kids love farming. They don't like living in the city. They love working with animals. It is a philosophical conversation and an adult one. How do you reconcile that when you're asking them to walk away doing the very thing they love doing?
If I could, I would like to answer your question with a question.
By all means.
Is it that your children like farming, or is it that they like the animals?
They love working with animals.
Yeah. So,
Every day, farming with animals.
yeah. But would they love farming if it wasn't with animals?
They love animals irrespective of farming.
Yeah.
But the point is they are farming with
Yeah.
animals.
But that's my point, is that
They've
they
got
love
pets that
the
they don't
animals.
farm.
Yeah.
But they work with big animals in a cow shed every day.
Yeah.
And it's a symbiosis, you might say, between man and beast without using crude language. But we actually love working with animals.
Absolutely.
You'd almost be robbing us in this instance of our lifestyle choice.
So
Do you not see it that
we
way?
wouldn't be robbing you, because all we're saying is that people shouldn't be farming the animals. That doesn't mean you can't still have the animals on the land and care for them.
It's a not profit really, so why would you do it?
So is that why you're farming animals, for profit, not because you love them?
There's 2 arguments here, right? You've got to make a living to survive.
You do, absolutely, yeah.
So
You
now,
have to make a living to
oh, there
survive.
we
You
go.
can still love it.
I just like to be
You just knocked him with the idea of having to have pumpkin milk on his cornies this morning.
Well, let's just hope there's profit.
You are, no, I'm sure the cows on the farm would love to have those pumpkins
I
as
like
well.
Glad you're otherwise.
I would like to say one thing. It will sound probably a bit dark. What is a life where your day of death is planned before you're already born? For an animal, for a cow on a farm.
It's interesting.
But would these animals exist? I mean, as Mark pointed out, that you've got to be able to afford to put a roof over your head and food on the table for your families. Where would these animals exist if we're converting all of the land to produce plant-based protein?
You just don't replace them.
Not all
I think we need to do a caucus trip to Daisy Lab.
Thank you very much for your time. We really, really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very
As
much.
you can see,
Great.
members have been very. So,
I want to ask about clothing.
we may send you some follow-up written
I was going to
questions.
say, if we were set up an informal meeting sometime, we can have a cordial, we can come.
Can you guys bring the food?
Oh my God, yes.
That pumpkin milk you speak of.
Right,
Chocolate
members,
vegan brownie.
order, thank you. Right, we may follow up with some written questions from members. As
Absolutely.
you can see, there is quite a lot of interest. They're very keen to tease out exactly what this would look like potentially. Really appreciate your time and staying well beyond your 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
It's in case
We
you're
appreciate the time. Thank you so much. It's been a really great conversation.
I'll be talking about it all day. on
Excellent.
After the budget.
There'll be a lot of money.
Yes,
in
after the
for
budget, yeah, maybe give it a week or two.
Thank you.
So go and look at what Venture Taranaki are doing.
Yes, Venture Taranaki.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're all over hemp.
Hemp,
and
botanicals.
botanicals and hops and all those other
Excellent,
fun
yes.
things that you can do.
They sound
Maybe
like
have
all of the
yourself in
things
as
in the
well.
reports.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that transition
And leaf.
conversation's happening.
Left. Oh, yes.
LEFT.
Yes, I have seen
Left.
either a report or something coming out from their website. Yeah. Yeah. I've been deep in their things recently.
So yeah, so this
Yeah.
that
Lovely.
investment is happening. So you're saying do more.
Yes, do more. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.